Chapter 62, Sariputta's Roar. When the retreat season ended, Venerable Sariputta bid farewell to the Buddha before travelling to spread the Dharma. The Buddha wished him a calm and safe journey and a body and mind free of all cares. He said he hoped Sariputta's efforts to spread the Dharma would not meet with too many obstacles. Venerable Sariputta thanked the Lord and then departed. That noon, a bhikkhu came to the Buddha and complained of being mistreated by Sariputta. He said, "I asked Venerable Sariputta where he was going. He refused to answer me and in fact pushed me out of his way so hard that I was knocked to the ground. He made no apology but continued on his way." The Buddha turned to Ananda and said, "I do not think Sariputta will have travelled too far yet. Send one of the novices after him. Tonight we will hold a community meeting in Jeta Dharma Hall." Ananda did as the Buddha asked, and by late afternoon, Venerable Sariputta had returned to the monastery with the novice. The Buddha told him, "Sariputta, tonight the entire community will meet in the Dharma Hall. A bhikkhu has accused you of knocking him to the ground without apologizing." That afternoon, Venerables Moggallana and Ananda visited all corners of the monastery to announce the evening meeting. They said, "You are invited to attend a meeting in the Dharma Hall tonight. Tonight, Brother Sariputta will have a chance to offer his lion's roar." Not one bhikkhu was absent from the hall that evening. Everyone wanted to see how Sariputta would respond to those who had for so long begrudged his position in the sangha. Venerable Sariputta was one of the Buddha's most trusted disciples, and because of that, he was the object of much misunderstanding and jealousy. Some of the bhikkhus felt that the Buddha placed too much trust in Sariputta. They felt Sariputta wielded too great an influence. When some bhikkhus were corrected by the Buddha, they mistakenly blamed Sariputta for pointing out their errors to the Buddha. Some bhikkhus felt almost a hatred for Sariputta. They were unable to forget that some years before, the Buddha had invited Sariputta to share his seat. Venerable Ananda recalled one monk named Kokalika who had lived at Jetavana 8 years earlier. Kokalika hated Sariputta and Moggallana so much that not even the Buddha himself could persuade him otherwise. Kokalika said that Sariputta and Moggallana were both hypocrites whose actions were motivated by ambition. The Buddha met privately with him and said that these two elders were sincere and that their actions arose from loving kindness. But Kokalika's mind was filled with jealousy and hatred, and finally he left the monastery, joined the Venerable Devadatta in Rajgaya, and became one of Devadatta's closest associates. It was because of these kinds of problems that Ananda had been reluctant to accept the responsibility of becoming the Buddha's attendant. Without the conditions he had suggested, such as not sleeping in the same room or sharing the same food with the Buddha, Ananda knew that many brothers would resent him also. Some brothers felt they did not receive enough of the Buddha's attention. Ananda knew that such feelings could lead to anger and hatred, and could even lead some to abandon the Buddha, their teacher. Ananda also recalled a woman in Kalama Sutra village in Kosambi named Makandika, who grew to hate the Buddha when she did not receive special attention from him. She was a beautiful Brahmana woman. The Buddha was 44 years old when she met him. She was immediately attracted to him, and as her feelings grew stronger, she longed to know if the Buddha felt any special regard for her. Magandika did everything she could think of to receive his special attention, but the Buddha treated her as he did everyone else. In the end, her affections turned to hatred. When she later became the wife of King Udina of Vamsa, she used her position and influence to spread rumors and insults about the Buddha. She even pressured the authorities into forbidding the Buddha to give public Dharma talks. When Samavati, a beloved concubine of King Udina, became a disciple of the Buddha, Magandika found ways to make her suffer. Disturbed by all of this, Ananda suggested to the Buddha that they leave Kasambi to spread the Dharma in a more hospitable place. The Buddha asked him, "If we go somewhere else and meet with insult and difficulty there too, what should we do?" Ananda replied, "Move on to some other place." The Buddha disagreed. "That would not be correct, Ananda. We must not become discouraged every time we meet with difficulty. Solutions should be sought in the very midst of hardship. Ananda, if we practice equanimity, we will not be bothered by insults and slander. The people who slander us cannot harm us, they only harm themselves. When a man spits at the sky is not solid. The spit falls back in the face of the one who spat." Ananda had no worries about Sariputta's ability to deal with the present situation. Venerable Sariputta was rightfully trusted by the Buddha. He was a truly virtuous and worthy elder of the sangha. Because of his deep insight, the Buddha depended on his help in guiding the sangha. He was the author of several sutras, including the Happy-Padopana Sutta, the sutra on the elephant's footprint, in which he spoke about the relation of the 4 elements to the 5 aggregates in an original way, based on the fruits of his own practice. When the Buddha entered the Dharma hall, all the bhikkhus rose to their feet. He motioned for them to be seated again, and then sat down himself. He motioned to Venerable Sariputta to sit on a low chair placed next to him. The Buddha spoke to Sariputta. "A bhikkhu has accused you of knocking him down and not apologizing. Do you have anything to say about this?" Venerable Sariputta stood and joined his palms. He bowed first to the Buddha and then to the community. He said, "Lord, a monk who does not practice, who does not contemplate the body in the body, who is not mindful of the actions of the body, such a monk could knock down a fellow monk and leave him there without apologizing. Lord, I still remember the lesson you gave 14 years ago to Bhikkhu Rahula. He was only 18 years old at that time. You taught him to contemplate the nature of earth, water, fire, and air, in order to nourish and develop the 4 virtues of loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Although your teaching was directed at Rahula, I learned from it also. I have made efforts to observe that teaching throughout the past 14 years, and I have often thanked you inwardly. Lord, I have practiced to be more like the earth. Earth is wide and open and has the capacity to receive and transform. Whether people toss pure and fragrant substances such as flowers, perfume, or fresh milk upon the earth, or toss unclean and foul-smelling substances such as excrement, urine, blood, mucus, and spit upon it, the earth receives it all equally, with neither grasping nor aversion. Lord, I have contemplated to make my mind and body more like the earth. A monk who does not contemplate the body in the body, who is not mindful of the actions of the body, such a monk could knock down a brother monk and leave him without apologizing. Such is not my way. Lord, I have practiced to be more like water. Whether someone pours fragrant substances or defiled substances into water, the water receives them both without grasping or aversion. Water is immense and flowing and has the capacity to transform and purify. Respected Buddha, I have contemplated to make my body and mind more like water. A monk who does not contemplate the body in the body, who is not mindful of the actions of the body, such a monk could knock down a brother monk and leave him without apologizing. Such is not my way. Lord, I have practiced to be more like fire. Fire burns all things, the beautiful as well as the impure, without grasping or aversion. Fire has the ability to burn, purify, and transform. Respected Buddha, I have contemplated to make my body and mind more like fire. A monk who does not contemplate the body in the body, who is not mindful of the actions of the body, such a monk could knock down a brother monk and leave him without apologizing. Such is not my way. Lord, I have practiced to be more like air. The air carries all manner of smells, good and bad, without grasping or aversion. Air has the capacity to transform, purify, and release. Respected Buddha, I have contemplated to make my body and mind become more like the air. A monk who does not contemplate the body in the body, who is not mindful of the actions of the body, such a monk could knock down a brother monk and leave him without apologizing. Such is not my way. Lord, like a small untouchable child with tattered clothes, who clasps a bowl and begs in the street for scraps of food, I practice to hold no false pride or arrogance. I have tried to make my heart like the heart of an untouchable child's heart. I have tried to practice humility, not daring to place myself higher than others. Respected Buddha, a monk who does not contemplate the body in the body, who is not mindful of the actions of the body, such a monk could knock down a brother monk and leave him without apologizing. Such is not my way. Venerable Sariputta was prepared to continue speaking, but his accuser could bear no more. He stood up and draped a corner of his Sangeti robe over his shoulder and then bowed to the Buddha. With his palms joined, he confessed, Lord Buddha, I have violated the precepts. I have borne false witness against Venerable Sariputta. I confess my transgression before you and the entire community. I vow to observe my precepts in the future. The Buddha said, it is good that you have confessed your transgression before the community. We accept your confession. Venerable Sariputta joined his palms and said, I bear no grudge against my brother, and I ask him to forgive anything I may have done to upset him in the past. The bhikkhu bowed to Sariputta with his palms joined. Sariputta returned his bow. Happiness filled the Dharma hall. Venerable Ananda stood up and said, Brother Sariputta, please stay with us for a few more days. Your brothers would welcome a chance to spend more time with you. Venerable Sariputta smiled his acceptance. With the retreat season over, the Buddha traveled to many villages in the countryside. One day, he spoke in Kesaputta, a village which belonged to the Kalama clan. Many young people gathered to hear him. They had all heard about the monk Gautama, but this was the first opportunity they had to meet him in person. One young man joined his palms and spoke. Teacher, for a long time, many Brahmana priests have come to Kesaputta in order to teach their various doctrines. Each priest claims that his doctrine is superior to others' doctrines. This has confused us. We do not know which path to follow. In fact, we have lost faith in all the doctrines. We have heard that you are an enlightened master. Can you tell us whom we should believe and whom we should not? Who speaks the truth and who is merely spreading false doctrines? The Buddha answered, I can understand why you have given rise to doubts. Friends, do not be hasty to believe a thing, even if everyone repeats it, or even if it is written in Holy Scripture or spoken by a teacher revered by the people. Accept only those things which are called with your own reason, things which the wise and virtuous support, things which in practice bring benefit and happiness. Abandon those things which do not accord with your own reason, which are not supported by the wise and virtuous, and which in practice do not bring benefit and happiness. The Kalamas asked the Buddha to tell them more. He said, friends, suppose there is a person ruled by greed, anger, and ignorance. Will his greed, anger, and ignorance bring him happiness or suffering? The people answered, Master, greed, anger, and ignorance will cause such a person to commit acts that bring suffering to himself and others. Is living by greed, anger, and ignorance supported by the wise and virtuous? No, Master. The Buddha continued, take the example of someone who lives according to loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, who makes others happy by relieving their suffering, who rejoices over the good fortune of others, and who treats others without discrimination. Will such qualities bring that person happiness or suffering? Teacher, such qualities will bring happiness to the person and to all those around him. Are loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity supported and encouraged by the wise and virtuous? Yes, Master. My friends, you are already qualified to discern which things to accept and which things to discard. Believe and accept only those things which accord with your own reason, those things which are supported by the wise and virtuous, and those things which in practice bring benefit and happiness to yourselves and others. Discard things which oppose these principles. The Kalama youth were encouraged by the Buddha's words. They saw that his teachings did not require unconditional faith. The Buddha's way truly respected freedom of thought. Many of the Kalamas asked to be accepted by the Buddha as his disciples that day. Chapter 63, All the Way to the Sea. During his travels, the Buddha stopped in the village of Alavi. The Buddha and 8 bhikkhus were offered a meal in a public building there, while all the local people were served food as well. Following the meal, the Buddha was about to begin a Dharma talk when an elderly farmer, almost out of breath, entered the hall. He was late because he'd had to search for a lost water buffalo. The Buddha could see that the old farmer had not eaten all day, and he asked that rice and curry be served to the old man before he would begin the Dharma talk. Many people felt impatient. They did not understand why one man should be allowed to hold up the Buddha's discourse. When the farmer was finished eating, the Buddha said, Respected friends, if I delivered a Dharma talk while our brother was still hungry, he would not be able to concentrate. That would be a pity. There is no greater suffering than hunger. Hunger wastes our bodies and destroys our well-being, peace, and joy. We should never forget those who are hungry. It is a discomfort to miss one meal, but think of the suffering of those who have not had a proper meal in days or even weeks. We must find ways to ensure that no one in this world is forced to go hungry. After Alavi, the Buddha followed the Ganga northwest towards Kosambi. He paused to watch a piece of driftwood being carried downstream. He called to the other bhikkhus, pointed to the piece of wood and said, Bhikkhus, if that piece of driftwood did not become lodged against the riverbank, if it does not sink, if it does not become moored on a sandbar, if it isn't lifted out of the water, if it isn't caught in a whirlpool or rot from the inside out, It will float all the way to the sea. It is the same for you on the path. If you don't become lodged against the riverbank, if you don't sink, if you don't become moored on a sandbar, if you are not lifted out of the water, if you do not become caught in a whirlpool or rot from the inside out, you are certain to reach the great sea of enlightenment and emancipation. The bhikkhu said, "Please, Lord, explain this more fully. What does it mean to become lodged against the riverbank, to sink, or to be moored on a sandbar?" The Buddha answered, "To become lodged against the riverbank is to become entangled by the 6 senses and their objects. If you practice diligently, you will not become entangled in feelings which result from contact between the senses and their objects. To sink means to become enslaved by desire and greed, which rob you of the strength needed to persevere in your practice. To become moored on a sandbar means to worry about serving only your own desires, forever seeking advantages and prestige for yourself, while forgetting the goal of enlightenment. To be lifted from the water means to lose yourself in dispersion, loitering with people of poor character instead of pursuing the practice. To be caught in a whirlpool means to be bound by the 5 categories of desire, being caught by good food, sex, money, fame, or sleep. To rot from the inside out means to live a life of false virtue, deceiving the sangha while using the Dharma to serve your own desires. Bhikkhus, if you practice diligently and avoid these 6 traps, you will certainly attain the fruit of enlightenment, just as that piece of driftwood will make it to the sea if it overcomes all obstacles." As the Buddha spoke these words to the bhikkhus, a youth tending water buffaloes nearby stopped to listen. His name was Nanda. He was so moved by the Buddha's words that he approached the bhikkhus and asked to be accepted as a disciple. He said, "Teacher, I want to be a bhikkhu like these brothers. I want to follow the spiritual path. I promise to devote myself to studying the way. I will avoid becoming caught against the riverbank, sinking, becoming moored on a sandbar, being lifted from the water, becoming caught in a whirlpool, and rotting from the inside out. Please accept me as a disciple." The Buddha was pleased by the young man's bright countenance. He knew the young man was capable and diligent, although he had probably had little or no schooling. The Buddha nodded his acceptance and asked, "How old are you?" Nanda answered, "Master, I am 16. "Are your parents living?" "No, Master, they are both dead. I have no other family. I take care of a rich man's water buffaloes in exchange for shelter." The Buddha asked, "Can you live on just 1 meal a day?" "I have been doing that already for a long time." The Buddha said, "In principle, you should be 20 years old before being accepted into the sangha. Most young men are not mature enough to live the life of a homeless monk until they are at least 20. But you are clearly special. I will ask the community to waive the usual requirement in your case. You can practice as a Samanera novice for 4 years before taking the full precepts. Return the water buffaloes and ask your master's permission to leave his employment. We will wait to hear for you." The youth replied, "Master, I do not think that will be necessary. These buffaloes are very obedient. They will return to the stable on their own, even without my assistance." The Buddha said, "No, you must lead them back yourself and speak to your master before you can join us." "But what if you are gone by the time I return?" The Buddha smiled. "Do not worry. You have my word that we will wait here for you." While Nanda led the buffaloes back to their stable, the Buddha spoke with Svasti. "Svasti, I will place this young man under your care. I believe you understand best how to guide and support him." Svasti joined his palms and smiled. Venerable Svasti was 39 years old now. He knew why the Buddha wanted him to be young Nanda's instructor. Long ago, the Buddha delivered the sutra on tending water buffaloes after being inspired by his friendship with Svasti, when Svasti was a buffalo boy like Nanda. Svasti knew he could guide Nanda well on the path. He knew that his closest friend, Venerable Rahula, would assist him also. Rahula was now 36. Svasti's siblings were all grown with families of their own. The hut they once shared had long since perished. Svasti recalled with a smile the visit he made to Uruvela one year with Rahula. It was after Rupak had married and moved to another village. At that time, Bhima and Bala still lived together and supported themselves by making and selling cakes. Bhikkhus Svasti and Rahula walked to the Naranjara river. Svasti had not forgotten his promise to give Rahula the experience of riding on a water buffalo, and so he called to some young buffalo boys who were grazing their buffaloes near the riverbanks. He asked them to help Bhikkhu Rahula climb onto the back of one of the great beasts. At first, Rahula hesitated, but then he removed his sangeti and handed it to Svasti. Rahula was touched by how gentle the mighty beast was. He shared his impressions of the leisurely ride with Svasti, and he wondered aloud what the Buddha would think if he could see him. Svasti smiled. He knew that if Rahula had remained in the Sakya palace to one day become king, he would never have enjoyed this water buffalo ride. Svasti returned to the present moment just as Nanda arrived. That night, he shaved Nanda's hair and showed him how to wear the robe, carry the begging bowl, walk, stand, lie down, and sit as a mindful bhikkhu. Nanda was mature and diligent, and Svasti enjoyed helping him. He recalled how some years ago, 17 young people had been accepted into the sangha at Bamboo Forest. The oldest boy, Upali, was 17, and the youngest only 12. They were all from wealthy families. When Upali asked his parents to allow him to become a bhikkhu, and they agreed, 16 of his friends implored their parents to let them do the same. Once they joined the sangha, they were expected to follow the life of a bhikkhu, including eating only one meal before noon. The first night, several of the youngest boys cried from hunger. When the Buddha asked next morning why he heard children crying in the night, he was told about the boys being accepted into the community. The Buddha said, "Henceforth, we will accept only young men who are at least 20 years of age into the sangha. Children cannot be expected to live the life of a homeless monk." The boys were allowed to stay, but the Buddha asked that those 15 years old and younger be given an additional meal in the evening. All the boys remained bhikkhus. The youngest one, Svasti realized, was already 20 now.